The seizure order came to the Willow House at the gray hour before the birds, and I knew it was a lie before I had finished reading it. I was the warden of that quiet estate, Corwin Ashmoor, 22 years in the King's Guard, the last 9 of them spent not at the palace gates where the crowds gather with their phones and their gawking, but out along the river reach where the late Queen Isolde had kept her private house. It is not a grand place, the Willow House. That is the point of it. A long, low hall of pale stone, a walled garden gone soft with age, an orchard, a chapel no bigger than a cottage, and a stable where an old gray mare still turned her head to every footstep on the gravel, waiting for a woman who would not come again. The dead queen had loved it because nobody there had ever needed her to be a queen. She could be tired there. She could be plain. When she died, the house did not so much fall silent as hold its breath, the way a room does when the person who filled it steps out and everyone waits, without saying so, for the door to open again. I had stood many kinds of watch in my life. That morning I learned there is a watch you keep over a thing that cannot defend itself, and it is the hardest of them all. The order was carried by a clerk named Pell, a soft-handed man in a good coat who would not meet my eyes, and behind him came 6 men in the livery of the Queen Consort's household, not guardsmen, not soldiers, but the kind of large idle men that grasping people keep about them to make their wishes look like force. Pell held out the paper with the trembling formality of someone who has practiced his lines and still does not believe them. "By instruction of Her Majesty the Queen Consort Morwenna," he said, "the estate known as the Willow House, together with its contents, its stock, its plate, and its stable, is to be inventoried and removed to the palace treasury this day, the late Queen Isolde's private property having passed by codicil to Her Majesty's own keeping." The word codicil sat in the cold air like a stone dropped into a still pond. I did not raise my voice. A guardsman who raises his voice has already lost the thing that makes him worth listening to. I took the paper. I read it once, and then, because I did not trust my own outrage, I read it a second time slowly, the way you read a map when a life depends on not mistaking the road. There was the seal. There was the language of the law, borrowed and heavy. And there, at the foot of it, was the claim that turned my stomach, that the late Queen Isolde, 3 weeks before her death, had set her hand to a new instrument, leaving all she privately owned, this house. Her mother's pearls, her books, the gray mare Bramblewick, not to her son the Crown Prince Rowan, to whom she had promised it in life 100 times over, but to the woman who had married her widower barely a year in the ground. "There is a difficulty," I said. Pell swallowed. "The order is lawful, Warden." "The order may be signed," I said. "That is a different thing from lawful. The late Queen made her wishes plain, and they are recorded, and they do not say this. The codicil supersedes." "Then I should like to see the codicil," I said, "and not a clerk's account of a codicil, the document itself, witnessed, dated, and in her hand. Until I hold that, no cart leaves this gate loaded, and no man of yours sets his boot past the orchard wall." One of the large, idle men behind Pell shifted his weight and let his coat fall open enough to show he thought himself important. I have faced men with real weapons and real training. A man who opens his coat to be admired is not one of them. I let my eyes rest on him until he did the arithmetic of the morning. 1 warden, yes, but a warden who had not moved, and behind the warden a house and a wall, and the plain fact that he did not actually know what he was permitted to do to a king's man, and he closed his coat again and looked at his boots. "You would defy the Queen Consort," Pell said, and there was fear in it, not for me but for himself, the fear of the small man caught between 2 larger forces. "I would defy no lawful order of the crown," I said. "I serve the crown, but this house was left in my charge by its mistress, and by the office I hold from the king himself, and I will not surrender it on the strength of a paper I have not seen and a story I do not believe. Take that back to the palace, Master Pell." Tell them the warden of the Willow House asks, respectfully, for the sight of the instrument they claim. That is not defiance. That is the law doing its slow work, which is the only work the law is any good at. He went. The 6 large men went with him, and I stood in the gateway a long while after the sound of their horses had died along the river road, my breath smoking in the cold, and I felt the whole weight of what I had just done settle onto my shoulders like a wet cloak. Because I had not, in fact, seen the codicil, I did not know it was forged. I only knew, the way you know a false coin by the wrongness of its ring before you have thought a single reason thought about it, that the woman who had lived in this house would sooner have burned it to the ground than left it to Morwenna. I knew it from the way she had spoken of her son. I knew it from the last spring of her life, when she was already ill and would not say so, and she had walked me through the orchard on my rounds and stopped by the young pear trees she had planted the year Rowan was born, and told me plainly that when she was gone the house was to go to him, and to his children after him, so that Malin and Torin and little Bram will have somewhere to be children, she had said, somewhere that is not a palace, where nobody is watching. She had made me promise to keep it well for them. A promise to the dead is a strange, heavy thing. It does not release you when they die. It tightens. So I sent my own message that same morning, not to the Queen Consort's household, but to the one man in the kingdom who had a right to know and the standing to act. I sent the stable boy, Ned, on the fastest horse we had, with a letter sealed in my own poor wax to the Crown Prince Rowan. Your mother's house is claimed against her wishes by a paper I have not been shown. I hold the gate. Come, or send a man of law before they come back with more than 6. Then I did what a guardsman does. I stood my watch. You must understand what the realm was like in those weeks, or nothing that followed will mean what it meant. King Alaric had been a good king, and was becoming an old one. That is the sorrow of good kings. The very steadiness that makes them loved in their strength makes them slow to see the rot when age softens them. He had loved Queen Isolde with the whole plain force of a man not given to poetry, and when she died something in him had gone quiet and would not wake. Into that quiet had come Morwenna. She was younger, handsome in a hard, bright way, clever as a blade, and she had made herself necessary to a grieving man in the 1,000 small ways that clever people can, reminding him to eat, ordering his days, standing at his elbow when the court frightened him with its noise. Within a year he had married her. Within 2, he had stopped noticing the length of her shadow. She had brought with her a grown son from a former marriage, Lord Cassius, who wore his stepfather's borrowed importance like a coat 2 sizes too large, and was forever hitching it up on his shoulders. And she had a daughter, Lady Verena, quieter than her brother and I would learn, not quite so lost to conscience as her mother wished. But the shape of it in those weeks was this: an old king half asleep in his grief, a queen consort filling the space around him with her own will, and standing apart from all of it, the late queen's son, Crown Prince Rowan, who had married a gentle woman named Alara and given the realm 3 bright children and who wanted, so far as any of us could tell, nothing more than to be left in peace to raise them until his sad turn came to reign. Morwenna could not abide him. I do not think she hated Rowan the way you hate an enemy. I think she hated him the way winter hates the memory of summer, as a reminder of a warmth she had come after, a warmth the people still loved and would always, in their hearts, love better. Every honor paid to Rowan's children was an honor not paid to hers. Every fond word the old folks spoke of the dead Queen Isolde was a knife turned in the pride of the living one. And the Willow House, the small plain house where the people believed the true Queen's spirit still walked, where flowers appeared on the gate on her name day left by hands nobody ever caught, the Willow House was the sharpest reminder of all. So she meant to take it. Not to live in, she would have found it beneath her, but to empty and shudder and let fall to ruin, so that in a few years there would be nothing there for the people to make a shrine of. That was the true shape of the thing. The codicil was only the tool. I did not know all of this on that first gray morning. I knew only that a false paper had come to my gate, and that I had turned it away, and that a great and vindictive power would not let such a thing rest. Rowan came the next day, and he came in a way I have never forgotten. He did not come with a train of soldiers. He did not come to make a show of it. He rode in with a single companion and a saddlebag, in a plain dark coat, like a man visiting the grave of someone he had loved, which, I suppose, is exactly what he was. He dismounted at the orchard gate and stood a moment looking at the house, and I saw the thing go over his face that goes over every child's face at the door of a dead parent's home, the sudden ambush of the ordinary, the boot scraper she had used, the crooked latch she had never fixed because she liked it crooked, the smell of the garden. Then he mastered it, because he was his mother's son and had learned stillness at her knee, and he came to me and took my hand in both of his. "Warden Ashmoor," he said, "you sent for me, you were right too." "Your Highness, I could not let them take it on a paper I doubted." "Tell me," he said, "all of it." Slowly. We walked the walls while I told him. It is easier to say hard things while walking, and I gave him the order Pell had left, and Rowan read it with the same double reading I had given it, once fast and once slow, and I watched the second reading land. He was a controlled man, Rowan. The court thought him cold because he did not spend his feelings cheaply. But there is a particular stillness that comes over a controlled man when he is very angry, a stillness that is the opposite of calm, the way the deepest part of a river looks smoothest, and that stillness came over him now. "My mother did not write this," he said. "No, sir, I do not believe she did." "You do not believe." He looked at me. "Belief will not hold against the Queen Consort's law clerks Ashmoor. She has men whose whole trade is making a lie stand up straight in a court. If we go before the king's bench and say only that we believe my mother would not have done this, they will smile and produce their witnessed instrument, and it will be we who look like grasping children quarreling over a dead woman's things." He was quiet a moment. "We need more than the feeling in our chests. We need the flaw in the thing itself. Every forgery has one. My mother taught me that oddly enough she loved old documents. She could read a false charter the way you read a false coin. There is always a wrongness, a date that could not be, a hand that tires where it should not, an ink too new. We must find the wrongness before they find a way to make the paper untouchable." "Then we must see the paper," I said. "Yes." Rowan looked down the long green throat of the orchard to where old Bramblewick stood at the stable door, gray against the gray stone, waiting as she always waited. "We must see the paper, and they will not want us to, which tells me, Ashmoor, that you are right, and that this is going to be a great deal worse before it is better." He was right about that. He was right about all of it, but neither of us yet knew how nearly it would come to ruin before the wrongness we needed showed itself, nor whose small, unlooked-for hand would be the one to pull it into the light. The Queen Consort did not send Pell again. She sent Lord Cassius. He came 3 days later, and he came the way his mother's power always came, early, loud, and certain it would be obeyed. This time there were not 6 idle men but a dozen, and a train of empty carts, and a second law clerk with a fatter satchel, and Cassius himself at the head of it on a tall horse. He sat badly, in a coat of a green so deep it was almost black, with a chain of office about his neck that no office I had ever heard of entitled him to wear. He had his mother's hard, bright handsomeness, and none of her cleverness, which is a dangerous combination, for it gives a man the appetite for power without the wit to know when he is overreaching. I met him at the gate as I had met Pell. Rowan was within, at my asking. There is a time for a prince to show himself, and a time for a prince to let a plain warden take the first weather, and this was the second. "You," said Cassius, looking down at me from his badly sat horse, "you are the one who sent my mother's clerk away with a flea in his ear. Do you know who I am?" "You are the Queen Consort's son, my lord." "I am the executor of the codicil," he said, "and I am here to execute it. Open the gate." "May I see the codicil, my lord?" Something flickered behind his eyes, not guilt. He had not the depth for guilt, but the small animal alarm of a man asked for a thing he has been told not to produce. The codicil is a legal instrument lodged with the palace. You do not need to see it. You need to stand aside. With respect, my lord, I have had it explained to me that a warden who surrenders a charge on a paper he has not read may answer for it with his own neck, if the paper proves false. So you see I have every reason to be careful and none at all to be reckless. Show me the instrument, or a true and certified copy of it under the seal of the king's bench, and I will read it, and if it is sound I will open this gate myself and help you load your carts. That is not obstruction. That is a man doing his office. You are a servant, Cassius said, and his voice went up and thinned the way a spoiled man's does when the world declines to arrange itself around him. You are a doorkeeper. You will do as. He is the warden of this estate, said a new voice quiet from behind me, appointed by my father the king, and he will do exactly as the law requires and not 1 inch more. Good morning, Cassius. Rowan had come out of the house. He came without hurry, and he came to stand at my shoulder, not in front of me, at my shoulder, which any soldier will tell you is the harder thing, for it says this man is mine, and I stand with him rather than stand back. I will handle this. And I saw the whole shape of the confrontation change in an instant, the way a room changes when the person everyone secretly defers to walks in. The dozen idle men who had been leaning on their carts straightened. Cassius's tall Badsat horse sidled under a rider who had gone suddenly uncertain in the saddle. Cousin, Cassius said. They were not cousins. It was a word he used to shrink Rowan to the size of a rival rather than the height of an heir. This is a family matter and a legal one. It does not concern the succession. My mother inherited this property by my late aunt's own free instrument. Your interference here is unseemly. People will say the Crown Prince quarrels over furniture. People will say what you pay them to say, Rowan answered without heat, which is a thing I have learned to weigh at its true small value. Here is what is true, Cassius, and you may carry it back word for word. My mother left this house to me, and to my children in the hearing of many, over many years. If she changed her mind in the last 3 weeks of her life, weeks when she was very ill and attended chiefly by your mother's people, then I will grieve that she did, and I will abide by it, for I honor the law even when it wounds me. But I will abide by it only when I have seen it, not the account of it, not the clerk's summary, the instrument, her hand, and I will have it examined by men who read old documents for the king's bench and answer to no one at this court. Bring me that and let it survive that examination, and I will hand you the keys of this house on my knees. Refuse it, and every soul in the realm will ask the one question you most wish unasked. If the paper is true, why will they not let it be seen? It was very well done. I have thought since that Rowan's mother taught him that too, not to win the argument, but to hand your opponent a question he cannot answer without hanging himself. Cassius sat on his bad horse and could not answer it. His mouth opened and shut. The law clerk beside him leaned and murmured something, and Cassius seized on it like a drowning man on a spar. The instrument, he said, will be produced before the king's bench in the fullness of time as the law provides. Until then the estate is under claim, and I will post my mother's men at this gate to see that nothing is removed or concealed. He said the word with a nasty little emphasis, as though we were the thieves. Nothing leaves, no documents, no valuables. No evidence. And there again, that flicker, he had said a word his mother would have skinned him for saying. Post your men, Rowan said. They will stand outside the wall. This gate and this house remain in the king's warden's keeping until a court says otherwise. If one of your men sets foot past the orchard wall, Warden Ashmoor will treat it as a trespass, and I will treat it as an insult to my father's authority. And you do not want either of those things, Cassius, truly you do not. So it was that the Willow House came under siege. A quiet, lawful, bloodless siege, the worst kind, the kind that grinds. Cassius left 8 of his men camped along the river road with their empty carts, a squalid little camp that stank of their fires and their idleness, and he rode back to the palace to tell his mother that the doorkeeper and the disinherited prince had defied her. And I stood my watch, and Rowan stood it beside me for a night and a day, and we began, in the little time the law's slowness bought us, to hunt for the wrongness in a paper we were not permitted to see. It is a strange thing to hunt a forgery you cannot hold. We could not examine the codicil, but we could examine everything around it, the story it told, the circumstances it claimed, the world it would have had to fit into to be true. And a lie, Rowan said, is like a man's shadow at noon. It may look convincing from directly above, but it never quite matches the shape of the thing that should have cast it. So we sat in the late Queen's small bookroom, among her plain shelves and her worn chairs, and we built the true shape of her last weeks so that we might see where the false paper failed to fit it. The codicil is dated, Rowan said, reading from Pell's original order which I had kept, the 12th of the wheat moon, 3 weeks before she died. Ashmoor, you were here. What do you remember of the 12th of the wheat moon? I remembered. Guardsmen are trained to remember days, for a day is often all that stands between an honest man and the gallows. She was very low that week, Your Highness. She kept to her bed. The physicians came twice a day. She saw almost no one. She was ashamed, I think, to be seen so reduced, she who had always been so straight-backed. Your father came. Your father and you and the little ones on the 9th, I remember, because Prince Bram cried at the door and would not go in, and she asked that he not be made to, that he remember her well and not sick. Rowan's jaw tightened. I remember, he said. That was the last time the children saw her. After that, I said, there were the physicians and her woman Aldith who nursed her, and I stopped, and I felt the first cold finger of the true thing touch the back of my neck. And the Queen Consort's people, I said slowly. Morwenna sent her own physician and 2 of her own women to spare our small household the burden, she said, from about the 7th. They were here in and out until the end. They were here on the 12th. Rowan set the paper down very carefully, the way you set down a thing that has become dangerous. So on the day this codicil claims, she summoned witnesses and set her hand to a new instrument, leaving everything to Morwenna, he said. The house was full of Morwenna's people, and my mother was too weak to leave her bed and had seen no lawyer of her own, and had said not one word to anyone who loved her about changing a will she had spoken of 100 times. He looked at me. It is not proof. But it is the shape of the shadow not matching the man who witnessed it. The order does not say. A true codicil names its witnesses. Why does theirs hide them? Because, I said, and my mouth had gone dry, the witnesses are Morwenna's own people, and a will witnessed only by the sole beneficiary's servants is worth the ash it should be burned to, Rowan said. Yes, if we can prove that is who witnessed it, but they will have thought of that. Cassius is a fool, but his mother is not, and there will be a name or 2 on that paper of someone who looks independent, a clerk, a minor cleric, a physician of good report, someone bought or fooled into lending his name. We must find who and break his story, or find the flaw in the document itself. He rubbed his eyes. He had not slept. And we must do it before the bench sits, because once a court has looked at a witnessed instrument and not been shown the flaw, it becomes law. And after that no truth in the world will pry this house from her hands. We reckoned, perhaps 2 weeks. The king's bench moved slowly, but it moved, and Morwenna's clerks were pushing hard to have the claim confirmed before the mood of the realm could turn. For the realm had begun to hear of it now. You cannot besiege a dead queen's house, however quietly, without the country coming to know. And the country, when it knew, was not quiet at all. Morwenna made her first great mistake with her mouth. She had held power long enough to forget that power granted by a husband's grief is not the same as power earned in a people's hearts, and that the 2 do not always agree. When the murmuring reached the palace, the flowers appearing again at the Willow House gate, now in far greater number, the ballad some anonymous hand had set going in the taverns about the true queen's house held against the false queen's greed, the small crowds that gathered on the river road to stare, silent and reproachful, at Cassius's squalid little camp, When all of this reached her, she did the thing that proud people do when they feel the ground shift. She did not retreat. She justified herself. Loudly. In public. She held a court audience. I had it from Verana's own lips later, but at the time we heard only the reports, and she stood at the old king's side, and when a bold old lord asked her, with the false courtesy that hides a knife, whether it was seemly for the crown to press a claim against the beloved late queen's own estate, Morwenna answered him before the whole court. The beloved late queen, she said, and there was ice in it, is beloved chiefly by those who did not have to manage her household accounts. Sentiment is a luxury of the idle, ideal in what is written and sealed. Isolde chose, in her wisdom, to leave her private property to the reigning queen rather than to a grown son who wants for nothing and a warden who forgets his place. I did not ask for it. I merely declined to be robbed of what the law has given me by a mob of ballad singers and a doorkeeper who thinks himself a magistrate. When the king's bench confirms the instrument, as it will, I trust every sentimental soul in this realm will find something more useful to weep over. It was a catastrophe, and she did not know it. She thought she had put down a challenge. What she had done was to insult, in one breath, the memory of a queen the people had loved, the grief of a prince they respected, and the plain decency of every ordinary man and woman who had ever loved a mother and dreaded the vultures at her deathbed. Within 2 days her words were in every market square in the kingdom, worn smooth and cruel by repetition. Sentiment is a luxury of the idle. And the realm, which had been merely uneasy, became angry, and then it became divided. For there were those at court and among the timid who said the Queen Consort must be right. The law is the law. A paper is a paper. And there were far more, in the streets and the fields and the small towns, who said a thing they did not have the law to prove but knew in their bones. That a woman who spoke so of the dead was capable of anything, and that no honest inheritance ever needed to be defended with contempt. I remember the morning that division came to my very gate. A crowd had gathered on the river road, a large one now, quiet as crowds are when they are more sorrowful than furious, and among them a knot of the Queen Consort's partisans, a few loud men in good coats who had ridden out to jeer, to say the prince was a sore loser and the warden a jumped-up jailer. And the two sides had begun to shove and shout, and Cassius's camped men, sensing sport, had begun to drift toward the trouble with their hands on their cudgels. And for one ugly moment I saw how it could go, how a lawful, bloodless siege could become a riot at a dead woman's gate, and how that, too, would serve Morwenna. For a riot could be blamed on the prince's supporters, and used to sweep the whole matter into her hands under the excuse of restoring order. I did the only thing a guardsman can do at such a moment. I opened the gate, and I walked out alone into the space between the two sides, unarmed, my hands open at my sides, and I stood there. I am the warden of this house, I said, not shouting, letting them lean in to hear, which is the oldest trick there is for quieting a crowd. I serve the queen who lived here. I stand her watch still. She would not want blood spilled at her gate, not yours and not theirs. So I ask you in her name to be still. The law will settle this. If the paper is true, this house will go to the Queen Consort and I will hand it over with my own hands. If the paper is false, it will be shown false and go to its rightful heir. Either way, no man here will hurry that day by breaking another man's head. Go home, bring your flowers if you love her, but go home. And they did, not because I was eloquent, I am not, but because a man who walks unarmed into the middle of a quarrel and asks for stillness gives both sides a way to step back without losing face. The prince's people took their flowers to the gate. The Queen Consort's men slunk back to their camp. And Cassius's captain, a hard-faced fellow named Drell, who was the only truly dangerous man in that squalid camp, looked at me for a long moment across the emptying road, and I understood that he had marked me, and that if it came to force, he would be the one who brought it. That night Rowan came out to me again. He had been going back and forth between the house and the palace, working the slow machinery of the law from the inside, and his face was gray. They have moved the bench date up, he said. It sits in 9 days. My father's own signature is on the order, though I would swear on my mother's grave he does not know what he has signed. She guides his hand now, Ashmoor. He signs where she points. 9 days, and then a panel of 3 judges, 2 of whom owe their seats to her, will look at a witnessed instrument, and unless we can lay the flaw before them, they will confirm it, and it will be done. 9 days, I said. 9 days. He looked toward the house, where a single candle burned in the bookroom, and beyond it to the stable where old Bramblewick stamped in the dark. And we do not yet have the flaw. We have the shape of the shadow, but not the man. We need someone who saw the thing signed or not signed. We need someone from inside her household who will tell the truth. He laughed without humor. And who among Morwenna's people would ever betray her? She rewards loyalty like a queen and punishes betrayal like a wolf. No one will speak. But someone would. And she was, at that very hour, unable to sleep in a fine cold room in the palace, sitting up with the particular misery of a young person who has watched her mother do a wicked thing, and been made, by silence, a part of it. I did not know Lady Warden then. I would come to know her a little in the days that followed, and to pity her, and to be grateful to her past any words I own. She came on the 4th night before the bench, alone, in a hooded cloak, on a hired horse, having slipped the palace by a servant's gate. A thing that must have taken more courage than I gave her credit for at the time, for if her mother had caught her at it, there would have been no forgiveness in that house. Cassius's men on the river road did not stop her. A lone cloaked rider in the dark did not fit the shape of the thing they were watching for. She left the horse at the orchard wall and came to the small side gate and did not knock but stood there. And it was I who found her, on my rounds, a slight shape pressed to the cold stone, as though she wished the wall would take her in. I must see the Crown Prince, she said, before I could challenge her. I am Warden, Lady Warden. She stopped, and the word she could not say was stepsister asterisk, for it named the very tie she had come to cut. Tell him a witness has come. Tell him quickly, before I lose my nerve and ride back. I brought her in. Rowan was in the book room. When she put back her hood and he saw who it was, I watched him go very still, the wary stillness of a man who has been fooled before and is asking himself whether this is a trap. It was a fair question. She might have been sent to feed us a false comfort, to make us relax our guard, to draw out our strategy. He did not trust her, and he was right not to. But he heard her. And this is what she said, sitting stiff and pale in the dead queen's worn chair, turning a ring round and round on her finger. I loved my Aunt Isolde, she said. You will not believe that, but I did. She was kind to me when my own mother was, when my mother was busy being queen. Isolde used to have me here to this house when I was small, before your mother married your father, before the greed came into it. She taught me to graft a pear tree. She never once made me feel I was the daughter of the woman who had taken her place. Warden's voice shook. And I cannot bear what is being done to her house in her name. I cannot bear the asterisk lie of it. That is the thing. My mother may take the house. She has the king's ear and the law clerks and the judges in her pocket, and I cannot stop her taking the house. But she is making my aunt into a woman who disinherited her own son, and that is a lie, and it will stand in the histories forever, and I will not be silent and let it stand. What do you know, Rowan said very quietly, about the codicil? I know it is false, Warden said. I know it because I know how it was made. I did not see it done. My mother is too careful for that. She does nothing where a witness she does not own can see, but I heard, and I saw the men who did it, and I can tell you where the flaw will be, because I heard my mother's own clerk complain of it. Rowan leaned forward. Tell me. There is a scrivener, Warden said, named Halding, a forger. My mother has used him for years, for lesser things, a favorable lease, a debt discharged, a letter that never was. He is very good. He can copy a hand so that the man whose hand it is cannot tell it from his own. My mother brought him in secret to the house, to asterisk this house in the last days of my aunt's illness, and he studied Isolde's letters, her account books, everything with her hand on it until he could write as she wrote. Then, after she died, he made the codicil. He wrote it in her hand and dated it back to the 12th of the wheat moon, and my mother's physician and her 2 women set their names as witnesses, swearing they had seen Isolde sign it living, when in truth she was 3 weeks dead before the ink was wet. The room was so quiet I could hear the candle. "You can prove none of this," Rowan said, not doubting her now, I saw, but testing the strength of what she brought, the way you test ice before you trust your weight to it. "Your word against the palace. The daughter turned against the mother. They will say you are jealous or mad or bought by me. Your word alone breaks nothing." "I know," said Warden. "That is why I have not brought you my word. I have brought you Haldane's mistake." And she reached into her cloak and drew out a single folded sheet and laid it on the table between them. "This is a leaf from the scrivener's own trial book. Every forger practices before he writes the true copy. He must, to get the hand right, to get the ink right, to be sure. Haldane practiced the codicil a dozen times before he wrote the one that was lodged with the court. And when he was done, he was to burn the practice leaves. He burned all but one, this one. I took it from the grate before the fire caught it, because I saw what it was, and because some part of me," her voice broke, "some part of me knew this day would come, and that my aunt would need one honest soul in that whole rotten house to have kept a piece of the truth." Rowan unfolded it. I came to look over his shoulder, and there in a hand I knew, for I had seen the late Queen's writing on 100 household orders, on the labels she tied to her seedlings, on the little notes she left for me on the gate post. There, in what looked for all the world like Isolde's own hand, was the same clause the codicil contained, written out and then struck through, and written again and struck through again, a man practicing, a man getting it right. And beneath it, in a different, cruder hand, the scrivener's own working notes to himself, 3 words that turned my blood cold and hot at once. "Ink too fresh, aged." "He knew," Rowan whispered. "He knew the ink of the true copy would be too new to have been written 3 weeks before her death. He wrote himself a note to age it, to treat it, stain it, smoke it, whatever forgers do, so that it would seem old." He looked up and his eyes were bright. "Ashmoor, this is the flaw, not the shape of the shadow, the man himself. If the ink on that lodged codicil has been artificially aged, a proper examination will show it. The aging never goes all the way through. They told my mother that once. A false-aged document is old on its face and new in its heart. We do not need Warden's word. We need the bench to order the codicil examined by an honest hand for false aging. And this," he touched the trial leaf as though it were a holy thing, "this proves there is something to look for. This is the thread that unravels the whole cloak." But even as he said it, I saw the difficulty, and so did he, and the brightness went out of his face. "They will never let it be examined," I said. "Cassius said it himself, nothing leaves, no evidence, no concealing asterisk. They will keep that codicil locked in the palace treasury until the moment it is laid before the bench, and they will let no hand touch it but their own tame examiner, who will swear the ink is old as the hills. We have the proof that a flaw exists. We do not have the power to make anyone look for it." "No," Rowan agreed. "We do not yet." He folded the trial leaf and put it inside his coat over his heart. "But we have 4 days, and we have this, and we have an honest witness, and we have something Morwenna does not have and has never had and cannot buy." He looked at Warden and then at me, and something in his tired face hardened into resolve. "We have the truth. Now we must find a way to force it into a room where she cannot keep it out." I did not know then how we would do it, neither did he. But the thing had turned. I felt it turn, the way you feel a tide turn under a boat before your eyes can see the water move. And though the worst of it was still ahead, and though it would come to my very gate with drawn steel before it was done, from that night I knew we were no longer merely defending. We had begun to attack. Warden could not go back. That was the first cost, and it came at once. She had meant to slip back to the palace before dawn and go on as before, a spy in her mother's house. But when she rose to leave, Rowan stopped her. "If you go back," he said, "and your mother learns you were gone even one night, and she will, She misses nothing, she will guess where, and she will destroy the codicil rather than let it be examined and burn Haldane's shop, and this leaf will prove nothing because there will be nothing left to compare it to. And she will do worse than that to you. No. You have crossed the river, Lady Wardenna. You cannot uncross it. You will stay here, under the Warden's protection, and be a witness before the bench in the open, where she cannot silence you. Wardenna went white. She will say I am mad. She will say I am a traitor to my own blood. She will say all of that, Rowan agreed gently. And the whole realm will look at a young woman who gave up her place and her mother and her safety to keep a dead queen's honor, and they will draw their own conclusions about which of you is the traitor to her blood. Stay. You will not be alone in it. I give you my word. She stayed, and that was the hinge on which everything after it swung, for once Morwenna knew her daughter had defected to the Willow House, the quiet lawful siege was over, and the true and dangerous phase of the thing began. The Queen Consort learned of it within the day, as Rowan had said she would. Her answer came fast and it came clever, and I will give her this. She was never a fool, whatever her son was. She did not send men to storm the house. That would have made a martyr of Wardenna and a tyrant of herself. Instead, she went to the old king, and she wept. We had it again, from those who saw it. She went to King Alaric with her hair loosened and her eyes red, and she told him that his son the Crown Prince had abducted her daughter, had lured the girl to the Willow House and was holding her there, poisoning her against her own mother, turning the family against itself out of spite over a house. She played, with terrible skill, on exactly the old man's two great fears, that his beloved second wife was being persecuted, and that his family was tearing itself to pieces in his failing years. And the old king, who could no longer tell his wife's tears from the truth, believed her. And he did the thing she had come to make him do. He signed an order in the king's own name, under the king's own seal, commanding the Crown Prince Rowan to release the Lady Wardenna at once, and to surrender the Willow House to the Queen Consort's men pending the bench, and declaring that any who resisted the order resisted the crown itself. That order reached my gate 2 mornings before the bench was to sit, and it was, I confess, the lowest hour of the whole affair, the hour I had least expected and could least answer. Because now the paper at my gate was not a false claim signed by Morwenna, it was a true command signed by the king. Cassius brought it himself, and this time he was not uncertain in the saddle. This time he sat his tall horse with the ugly confidence of a man who has finally been handed the whip. Behind him were not 8 idle men but 30, and at their head rode Drell, the hard-faced captain, in a mail coat, with real soldiers bearing, and I understood that the Queen Consort had at last put actual force behind her greed and dressed it in the king's own authority. "Warden," Cassius called down, and he was smiling now, "the game is over. Here is the king's own order, under the king's own seal, commanding you to open this gate and give up my kidnapped sister and this house to me. Defy the Queen Consort if you dare, you are only a doorkeeper. But defy the *King*, and you are a traitor, and every man behind you is a traitor, and we will hang the lot of you at the palace gate as a lesson to the realm. Now, open the gate." I took the order. I read it once fast and once slow, as I had learned to do, and my heart went down into my boots because it was real. The seal was true. The hand was the king's. I was, on the plain face of it, being lawfully commanded by my sovereign, and I had sworn my life to obey my sovereign, and here was my sovereign's own order, and every principle I had ever stood on told me to obey it. And behind me in the house were Wardenna, who if I gave her up would be silenced forever, and the trial leaf, and the whole thin hope of the dead queen's honor. And something else, too, that I have not yet told you, that had arrived in the night and changed the stakes past all bearing. For Rowan, when Wardenna defected and the danger sharpened, had done a thing that at first I thought reckless and came to see was the wisest of his life. He had brought his children to the Willow House. He had brought them for 2 reasons, and he told me both plainly. The first was that he did not trust them safe at the palace with Morwenna's rage rising and Morwenna's people all around them, better his own eyes on them and mine than her servants. The second was harder and truer. The realm is being told a lie about my mother, he had said, that she disinherited her grandchildren. Let the realm see her grandchildren in her house, where she wanted them, playing under the pear trees she planted for them. Let them see what the Queen Consort means to take away. A paper cannot argue with the sight of a small boy laughing in his grandmother's orchard. So they were there, Princess Malin, 9 years old and grave beyond her years, her father's own stillness in her. Prince Torin, 11, all elbows and questions. And little Prince Bram, 6, who had cried at his grandmother's door and would not go in, and who now ran wild and happy in her garden as though some part of him were making up for it. Princess Alara had come with them, gentle and steady, and the house that had held its breath since Isolde died had, for a few strange, bright days, been full of children's voices again. And I do not think I have ever seen the late Queen's orchard look so like itself. And now there were 30 armed men at the gate, with the king's own order, demanding I give it all up. "Well, doorkeeper," said Cassius, "the king commands, will you obey your king or hang?" I will tell you what I did, and I will tell you it was the hardest thing I have done in 22 years of service, harder than any blow I have taken or given. I closed the gate. "The order is the king's," I said through the bars, loud enough for the 30 men and the watching crowd on the road to hear, "and I honor it as the king's. But it is founded on a falsehood told to the king, that the Lady Morwenna is held here against her will. She is not. She is here of her free choice as a witness before the bench, under the Crown Prince's protection and mine. An order procured by a lie is a wrong done to the king, not a command from him. I will not obey a lie, even a lie wearing the king's seal. Let the Lady Morwenna stand here at this gate and tell you herself before all these witnesses whether she is held or free. If she says held, I open the gate this instant and yield myself to your rope. If she says free, then you will take your 30 men and your borrowed order back to the king, and you will tell him he has been deceived. Those are the terms. Bring me the girl's own voice, or bring me nothing." It was a gamble, and I knew it. If Cassius had been wiser, he would have refused, would have said the order was the order and forced the thing to steal. But Cassius could never resist a chance to be seen winning, and he was certain, I think, that a frightened girl faced with 30 armed men and her own furious family would crumble and beg to be taken home. "Bring her," he shouted, delighted. "Bring my poor kidnapped sister to the gate, and let her tell the realm how the Crown Prince holds her prisoner." So Morwenna came to the gate. Rowan walked her there and then stepped back to let her stand alone, which took a kind of courage in him too, to trust the whole thing to her nerve. She was pale as the stone. Her mother's captain and her mother's son and 30 of her mother's men stared at her through the bars. And I saw her look once back over her shoulder, not at Rowan but past him to the orchard, where little Bram had stopped his playing to watch, a small solemn figure with grass-stained knees, not understanding, only feeling the fear in the grown-up air. And I watched Morwenna find, in the sight of that child in that garden, whatever she needed to find. She turned back to the bars, and she lifted her chin, and in a voice that shook only at the first word and then went clear and hard as her aunt's had ever been, she said, "I am not held. I am free. I came here of my own will because my mother has forged a lie about a woman who was kind to me, and I mean to see it undone. Go home, Cassius. Tell your king, our king, that he has been made to sign a slander against his own son. And tell our mother that I know what she did on the 12th of the wheat moon, and that there is a witness to it now that even she cannot silence, because he practiced his crime on paper and was fool enough to leave a page in the grate." She stepped back from the bars. "I have nothing more to say to you. But the bench will hear a great deal from me." The silence after that was worth all the danger it had cost to buy. Cassius's delighted face had gone the color of tallow. Drell, the hard captain, had gone very quiet and very watchful, and I saw him mark, again, the strength of the gate and the number of us behind it and the crowd on the road, and do his soldiers' arithmetic, and I saw him decide that this was not the day. He put a hand on Cassius's rein. "My lord," Drell said low, "not here, not before these witnesses. We withdraw." "She is lying," Cassius began. "We withdraw," said Drell, in the flat voice of a man who has decided and will be obeyed, and he turned the whole troop, and they went, 30 armed men and a borrowed king's order and all, back down the river road under the silent stare of the crowd, and the Willow House had held one more day. But I did not sleep that night, and neither did Rowan, because we both knew what Warden had just done at the gate in her courage. She had told the enemy exactly what we had. She had told them about the trial leaf, and a wiser enemy, and Morwenna was wiser than her son, would now know precisely what she had to destroy before the bench sat, and precisely who held it, and exactly how little time she had to do it in. "She will not risk the bench now," Rowan said, standing with me at the dark gate while the last of the crowd's lanterns dwindled up the road. "She cannot. If the codicil is examined for false aging, she is finished, not just the house lost, but exposed, ruined, perhaps worse. She knows now that we can force that examination, so she will not let the bench sit at all. She will do the one thing that ends it before a court can look." He turned to me, and his face in the lantern light was grim. "She will come for the trial leaf, tonight or tomorrow night, quietly. Not 30 men at the gate, a few good men over the wall in the dark, to take the one page that damns her and put it in the fire, and perhaps to take Warden too, or silence her, so there is no witness and no proof and nothing but her word against the realms. Ashmoor, the danger is no longer the law. The danger is the dark. Set your watch as though your life depends on it, because I think tonight it does." It was the second night that they came. I had spent the first night braced for them, and they had not come, and the not coming had been its own kind of torment, the way waiting always is. By the second night my small household was strung tight as harp wire myself, and 2 under wardens I had sent for and trusted, old Bellamy and young Ned's father Hob, and Rowan himself, who would not be told to rest, and who took the middle watch at the book-room door where the trial leaf was hidden, a plain soldier again for one night instead of a prince. We had done what we could. The trial leaf itself was not in the book-room at all. Rowan had ridden out the first morning, and lodged the true page with a country magistrate 2 hours off, an honest old man beyond Morwenna's reach, and left in the book-room only a fair copy that looked like the thing, so that anyone who came to steal it would take the wrong page and think themselves clever. Warden slept, or lay wakeful, in the small chamber next to Alara and the children, with Bellamy on the stair below. The old grey mare Bramblewick was in her stable, and I had a thought about the stable too, and set Hob near it, though I could not have said why, except that the stable gate gave onto the orchard, and the orchard gave onto the house, and a man coming over the wall in the dark would find that the softest road. They came over the orchard wall a little after the moon went down. 4 of them, I know it was 4, for I counted them later, laid out on my kitchen floor with their hands bound, sullen and silent. 4 good quiet men, not the loud idle bravos of the camp, but Drell's best, in dark clothes with their faces blacked, moving the way men move who have done this work before. And Drell himself was one of the 4, which told me how much Morwenna feared what we held, that she sent her own captain to make sure of it. I want to be plain about what happened, because it is the heart of the matter and I will not dress it up. They did not come for the paper first. That is the thing I did not foresee and have never forgiven myself for not foreseeing. A colder, cleverer plan than I had braced for I had thought of my post and my papers and my duty, and I had not thought as a wicked person thinks. They came first for the child. Not to harm him. I do not believe even Morwenna would have ordered that, and I will not say she did, for I do not know it and will not forge my own lie to match hers. But they came in the dark, up the soft road through the orchard, meaning to reach the children's chamber and take one of them, little Bram, the youngest, the easiest to lift and carry silent and hold him, and use the holding of him to make Rowan give up the paper and Verena hold her tongue. A hostage. That was the plan. Take the small one, and the father will trade the world to have him back, and the daughter will swallow her courage, and the dead queen's honor and the Willow House and everything else will be theirs for the price of one frightened little boy carried off in the night. And it very nearly worked. I will carry to my grave how nearly it worked. Because they were good and quiet, and they were past Hob at the stable before he knew it, a soft sound, a scuffle, and Hob down and not moving, though he lived, thank God, he lived, and they were into the orchard and moving toward the house, and I was at the front at the gate, watching the road, watching the wrong direction entirely, like a fool, like a doorkeeper. What saved us was not me. What saved us was the old gray mare. Bramblewick had not settled since the strangers came near her stable. She was old, and she had loved one mistress and lost her, and she did not like men she did not know moving in the dark near her home. And when the 4 dark shapes passed her stable, and one of them, brushing the low door, startled her, she did the thing she had done every morning of her long life when a footstep came that she thought might be the one she waited for. She called out, a high, carrying, broken old whinny, ringing across the silent orchard, and then, when no beloved hand came, she flung herself against her stall and kicked the door, again and again, a racket in the dead of night that no sleeping house could ignore. I heard it from the gate, Rowan heard it from the book-room. And Princess Malin, grave 9-year-old Malin, who I would learn had been lying awake because she was frightened and would not say so, just as her grandmother had never said so. Malin heard it from the children's chamber, and Malin, who knew that horse, who had been told 100 times the tale of her grandmother's gray mare who called every morning for a mistress who would not come, knew in some deep child's way that Bramblewick did not cry out at nothing. And Malin did the bravest small thing of that whole brave affair. She did not scream, which would have told the intruders they were discovered. She slipped from her bed, and she woke her mother with a hand over her own mouth for quiet, and then she opened the shutter a crack and looked down into the orchard, and she saw them, 4 dark shapes in the moonless dark, moving toward the house, and she did the thing her father had taught all his children as a game that was not a game, the thing every child of that careful house knew. She took the little brass handbell from the mantel, the one kept there for exactly this, and she rang it out the window into the night, 3 and 3 and 3, the old alarm, the signal that means asterisk danger to me, now asterisk. And the whole house woke at once. I was running before the 3rd peal. Rowan came out of the book-room like something loosed. Bellamy was up the stair with a stave. And the 4 intruders, who had counted on silence and now had a ringing bell and a screaming horse and a waking house and lit windows all around them, found their whole plan collapse in an instant into the one thing it could not survive, which was to be seen. 3 of them ran. They went back over the wall the way they had come, and 2 got clean away into the dark and 1 did not, for I caught him at the orchard gate and put him down, and I am not ashamed to say I put him down hard, for he had come in the night for a sleeping child, and there is a limit to what discipline requires a man to gentle. But Drell did not run. Drell, the hard captain, when the bell rang and the house woke, did the coldest thing of all. He turned not to flee but to finish, and made straight for the house, for the stair, for the children's chamber, thinking, I suppose, that if he could reach the boy even now, even discovered, a hostage in hand would still turn the whole night his master's way. He reached the foot of the stair, and there he found the one thing between him and the children, and it was me. I had come in through the garden door and up, and I met him at the turn of the stair with the whole width of my body and my whole life's discipline, and I told him to stand, and he did not stand. I will not pretend it was a fair or a clean fight. It was a dark stair and a strong man who meant to get past me, and a warden who had sworn a dead queen he would keep her house and her son's children safe, and only one of us was going up that stair, and it was not going to be him. He was younger than me and quick, and he had a blade, and I had my hands and the stair and the rail and the plain animal will of a man standing between a killer and children, and that in the end is the stronger thing. I have seen it proved more than once, that the man defending the small and the sleeping fights past the end of his strength in a way the attacker never can. I took a cut across the arm I feel to this day when the cold comes. But I put him down on the stair, and I held him there with my knee in his back and my forearm across his neck until Bellamy and Rowan came, and we bound him, and it was over. And through all of it I want this written, for it is the whole point of the thing and the answer to every lie Morwenna ever told. Through all of it, not one child was harmed, not touched. Bram never woke. Torrin woke to a bound man on the stair and the excitement of it and no fear at all. And Malin stood in the door of the children's chamber in her nightgown, grave and pale, still holding the little brass bell, having saved them all and not knowing it. And when her father reached her, he went down on his knees in front of her, the Crown Prince of the realm on his knees on the cold floor, and took her small face in his 2 hands and could not for a moment say anything at all. "You rang the bell," he managed at last. "The horse woke me," Malin said in her grave little voice. "Grandmother's horse, she was calling. I knew she wouldn't call for nothing." And then, because she was 9, and it was very late, and the danger was past, she began quietly to cry, and her father gathered her up, bell and all, and held her, and I turned away and went to see to Hob and to the man in the kitchen, and to my own bleeding arm, because a warden does not weep where the household can see him. Though I will own to you now that I wept a little in the dark of the stable, with my hand on the neck of the old gray mare who had saved us all, and who was even then nosing at my coat, still waiting, still hoping, for the one who would not come. We had Drell, that changed everything. For Drell, the hard captain, was not a fool and not a fanatic, and when the cold morning came and he sat bound in my kitchen with the whole ruin of the night around him, he did the arithmetic one last time, and this time the sum came out plain. He had been taken in the act of coming by night, over a wall, into a house where the king's own grandchildren slept, with 3 others, at least one of whom had struck down a servant, and all of whom had meant to lay hands on a small boy. There was no lie in the realm that could dress that up as anything but what it was, and the woman he had done it for would not lift one finger to save him. That is the way of people like Morwenna, that their servants learn too late. Loyalty flows only one direction, up, and never comes back down. Drell knew, sitting in my kitchen, that his mistress would already be preparing to call him a rogue who had acted alone, a madman, a criminal she had never commanded and would see hanged with the rest. And a man who understands that about his master is a man ready to talk. He talked. Not to me. I had no authority to take his confession, and I would not have it said afterward that a warden had beaten a confession out of a prisoner. Rowan sent, at first light, for the honest country magistrate who held the trial leaf, and for 2 of the king's bench judges' own clerks, men of law with no love for Morwenna, so that everything Drell said was taken down properly, witnessed, sealed, made into the kind of truth that stands up in a court. And Drell told it all. The night plan and who gave it, the Queen Consort, through Cassius, in words Drell repeated exactly. And because once a man like that begins to save himself, he does not stop. He told the rest too, the older crime, the thing he had been paid to guard the secret of. He named the scrivener Halding. He told how Halding had been brought to the Willow House in the last days of the late Queen's illness. He confirmed, in the plainest words, that the codicil had been written after Isolde was dead and dated back, and that the ink had been treated to seem old, and that the 3 witnesses had sworn to a signing they never saw. Everything Verena had said, everything the trial leaf hinted. All of it now, from the mouth of the Queen Consort's own captain, taken down under the seal of the king's bench. The bench sat 3 days later. It sat, as courts do, in a great cold hall of the palace, before the 3 judges, 2 of whom, remember, owed their seats to Morwenna, and had expected a quiet morning's work confirming her claim. They did not get a quiet morning. I was there. Rowan had asked it of me, and I would not have been kept away by wild horses. I stood at the back in my warden's plain coat with my arm in a sling, and I watched the Queen Consort come in on the old king's arm, magnificent and certain, and I watched her look for her daughter among the crowd and not find her, for Warden did not enter with the court. Warden waited, as Rowan had arranged it to be called. Morwenna's clerks opened, as everyone knew they would, by laying the codicil before the bench, the great forged instrument itself, brought at last from the treasury under guard, the paper on which the whole theft rested. They laid it before the judges, and they spoke smoothly of a grieving widow's rightful inheritance and a jealous prince's unseemly resistance, and the two bought judges nodded along, and for a moment, I will be honest, for a moment it looked, even then, even with all we had, as though smoothness and certainty and the king's own presence might carry it, might roll straight over the truth the way such things so often do. And then Rowan rose. He did not shout, he never shouted. He said, in the level voice he had used at my gate, "Before the bench confirms this instrument, I ask one thing which no honest claim can fear. I ask that the codicil be examined here, now before us all, by an examiner of the bench's own choosing and not the Queen Consort's, for one thing only, whether its ink has been artificially aged." The smooth clerk began to object. Rowan spoke over him, still level, still quiet, and it was like a cold current under smooth water. A true document written 3 weeks before the late Queen's death needs no aging. It is old honestly. Only a false one written after her death needs to be made asterisk to seem old. So I ask the simple question, and the Queen Consort, if her claim is true, will welcome it. Examine the ink. If it is honestly old, I will withdraw every objection and yield the house on my knees, as I have said before witnesses I would. But if the ink has been aged by a forger's hand, old on its face and new in its heart, then this is no codicil at all, but a crime, and the woman who brought it before this bench must answer for it. And I watched the Queen Consort's face, and I saw the exact moment she understood that she had lost. She could not refuse the examination. To refuse was to confess, but to allow it was to be destroyed. She had walked into the one trap that certainty always walks into. She had been so sure the paper would never be questioned that she had never prepared an answer for the question. And now the question hung in that cold hall, and the whole court had heard it, and there was no smoothness left in the world that could talk it away. She tried. Of course she tried. She rose herself and spoke of the insult of it, the outrage that a widow's grief should be doubted, the disgrace of a prince who would drag his stepmother's honor through a public examination over a house asterisk. It was the same speech, in the end, as the one that had divided the realm. Sentiment is a luxury of the idle, dressed in wounded dignity. But it was too late for that speech, because the court now had a question that dignity could not answer, and they all knew it, and she saw them know it, and something went out of her face that never fully came back. The bench ordered the examination. There was no honest way for even the two bought judges to refuse it, not with the whole court watching and the question already asked aloud. The examiner was sent for, a dry, precise old man who worked with a lens and small bottles and cared nothing for kings or consorts, only for what was true of ink and paper. And while he worked, in the terrible silence of that hall, Rowan called his witnesses. He called Warden first. She came in pale and straight, and she told the court in her aunt's clear, hard voice everything, the scrivener Haldane, the studying of Isolde's letters, the codicil written after death and dated back, the trial leaf she had saved from the grate. Her mother stared at her the whole while with a face like winter, and Warden did not once look away. And when she was done, the hall was so quiet you could hear the examiner's small bottles clink at his table. He called the country magistrate who produced the trial leaf, the true page, kept safe 2 hours off, beyond Morwenna's reach, and laid it beside the codicil. And even from the back of the hall I could see it, the same clause practiced and struck through and practiced again in the late Queen's stolen hand, and the forger's own 3 cold words at the foot of it. Ink too fresh, aged. And then he called last the Captain Drell, who was brought in under guard, and who told the bench, under its own seal, of the night over the wall and who had ordered it, and of the forgery he had been paid to guard, and named Halding, and confirmed every word, until there was not one thread of the Queen Consort's cloak left whole. And through it all the dry old examiner worked at his table with his lens and his bottles, and when at last he was done he rose, and the whole hall turned to him, and he said in his precise indifferent voice the words that ended it. The ink of the outer strokes of this document has been treated with a staining agent to counterfeit age. Beneath the treatment the ink is new by months, not years. This instrument was not written on the date it bears. It was written after that date and aged by an unskilled hand. In my judgment before this bench, it is a forgery. I have stood many kinds of watch and heard many kinds of silence, but I have never heard one like the silence in that hall when the examiner sat back down. It was not the silence of a shocked crowd. It was the silence of a lie dying, which is the quietest and most complete silence there is, because in it 100 people who had half believed a thing all stop believing it at exactly the same moment, and there is nothing left to say. The old king rose from his seat. He rose slowly, an old man who had been half asleep in his grief for 2 years, and he looked at the forged paper on the table, and he looked at his son standing there level and unbroken, and he looked at his granddaughter Verena pale and straight beside him, and last of all he looked at his wife, at Morwenna, who had guided his hand where she pointed and wept the tears that were not true and made him sign a slander against his own son, and something woke in his old face that had been sleeping a long time. Not rage. Worse than rage for her, recognition. He saw her at last whole and plain the way I had seen her at my gate on that first gray morning, and he did not shout either he was Rowan's father or Rowan was his son. The stillness ran in the blood. He only said in a voice grown suddenly steady, "Take that woman's claim and burn it, and take the woman herself from my sight until the law has decided what is owed for it. My son's mother's house is my son's. It always was. The rest is telling, and I will tell it, because a story owes its people a proper ending, and I have never held with tales that stop at the moment of triumph and leave you to wonder how it all came to rest. The forged codicil was burned, there in the hall before the bench, so that no clever hand could ever raise it again. The late Queen Isolde's estate, the Willow House, her mother's pearls, her books, and the old gray mare Bramblewick passed, as she had always meant it to her son Crown Prince Rowan, and by his own instrument, drawn up that very week and this time witnessed by half the realm, to his children after him, so that Malin and Torin and little Bram would have, as she had wished, somewhere to be children that was not a palace, where nobody was watching. The scrivener Halding was taken. He did not go quietly, and he did not go with dignity, and when he understood that his own trial leaf had damned him, he wept and named others, as such men do, and a good deal of older rot in the Queen Consort's affairs came up into the light along with him, so that the forgery of the codicil proved to be only the last and boldest of a long trade in false papers. He answered for all of it before the law. The 3 witnesses who had sworn to a signing they never saw were disgraced and punished, as the law provides for those who bear false witness. The 2 judges who had owed their seats to Morwenna and expected a quiet morning were quietly removed from the bench, for a judge who is another's creature is no judge at all, and the king, awake now and ashamed of how long he had slept, saw to it himself. The Queen Consort Morwenna was not hanged. I know some who wished it in the hot flush of the thing, but the realm is better than its worst wishes, and the old king, even seeing her plain at last, would not send to the gallows the woman he had once been glad to marry. She was stripped of the honors and offices she had gathered to herself, and separated from the king's household in person, and sent to a small far estate, a plain low house on a distant reach, walled and quiet, to live out her years apart, which is a punishment I have thought since carried its own strange justice, that the woman who could not bear the dead queen's small plain house should end her days in one very like it, alone, with no court to fill the space around her and no husband's grief to bend. Cassius, who had done the ordering and the sneering and the sitting badly on tall horses, went with her, his borrowed importance stripped away, hitching at a coat that was suddenly his own true size and far too small. And I am told that on the day they went, no flowers appeared at their gate, and none ever have. But Warden did not go with them. Warden, who had crossed the river and could not uncross it and had not tried to, stayed in the realm, honored. Rowan kept his word to her past the letter of it. He did not merely protect her, he raised her up, and the realm, which had watched a young woman give up her mother and her place and her safety to keep a dead queen's honor, drew exactly the conclusion Rowan had promised it would about which of the two was true to her blood. She learned to graft the pear trees again, in the orchard where her aunt had taught her, and she comes there still, I am told, on the late queen's name day, and leaves flowers at the gate with the rest, no longer needing to hide her face. Old Hob mended, and stands his watch to this day, though he tells the tale of the night rather more often than is strictly needful. The old grey mare Bramblewick, the true hero of it, if a house may have a hero with 4 legs, lived 3 more good years in her stable, and I will tell you a thing I have told no one, that in those 3 years she was less restless than she had been, less given to calling in the night for the one who would not come, as though somewhere in her old horse's heart she had understood that the children were in the orchard now, that the house was full of the right voices again, that what her mistress had wanted had come to pass. She died at last in her sleep in her own stall, and we buried her under the young pear trees, which seemed only right. And little Prince Bram, who had cried at his grandmother's door and would not go in, and who slept clean through the night that 4 grown men came over a wall to carry him off, Bram grew up in that house, in and out of that orchard, with no memory at all of the danger he was in, which is exactly as it should be, for that is the whole of what a guard is for. A child who never knows the shadow that passed over him is a guard's finest work. He knows the story now, of course, for they told him when he was old enough, and I am told that of all of it the part he loves best, and asks for again and again, is the part about his grandmother's grey mare who cried out in the dark because she thought a stranger might be the one she waited for, and by that crying woke his sister, and so saved them all. He is right to love that part best. It is the truest part. As for me, I am the warden of the Willow House still. My arm aches when the cold comes, and I am slower on my rounds than I was, and one day soon they will give my post to a younger man, and I will let them and be glad. But I have kept the thing I promised the woman who walked me through her orchard in the last spring of her life, and made me swear to keep her house well for the children who would come. I kept it. There were nights I did not think I could, nights when the paper at my gate wore the king's own seal, and the law itself seemed to be on the side of the lie. But a false paper has a flaw in it always, and a forger leaves a page in the grate, and a grave girl remembers a horse that does not call for nothing, and an old mare waits at a stable door, and out of such small honest things, in the end, the truth is put back where it belongs. I stood a great many watches in my 22 years. That was the one that mattered. And if you ask me, as people sometimes do, what a king's guard is truly for, not the marching, not the tunic and the medals, but the thing underneath, I will tell you it is this, and only this, to stand still and unbreaking over what cannot defend itself, and to keep faith with the ones who trusted us, especially the ones who are no longer here to see whether we kept it. The dead queen is not here to see. But her house stands, and her son holds it, and her grandchildren laugh in her orchard under the pear trees she planted with her own hands, and every spring the flowers come to her gate from hands nobody catches. And I think if she can know it, she knows. And I think it is enough.